Folks, I don't know where the last 2 days have gone to. I said this at the end of yesterday, I feel a little bit numb, but I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for us to kind of bring it all together after 2 days of amazing content. Thanks again to all our speakers. We're just standing between one amazing speaker who I'm sure is going to inspire and motivate and give you some great business lessons. Azran Osman Rani is in the room and will be joining us after this, but just allocated a final half hour or so just to wrap up the 2 days. And I've had so many learnings myself, but I wanted to go through with some of our esteemed speakers and panelists that we've had. We've had great case studies, great panels, some interviews, some keynotes. One of the, in my opinion, best sponsorship case studies in the mass participation that I've seen, and James is nodding his head, and he's been in this industry a long time, IMG days, Limelight times, and I think we've all learnt a lot here from so many people. But I'd like to maybe hear from the panels as to what their key takeouts have been, and happy to have a couple of comments from the floor as well. And maybe let's just start from the far end. James, what have been, I guess, the key learnings for you and the key observations as to where the mass participation industry is going?
I think the biggest learning for me in terms of everything that's been talked about is there's been a message resonating through about keeping everything simple. If we overcomplicate, if we try and use too many data points, use too many technology pieces, we lose the focus on the consumer, giving them a smooth customer journey. And yeah, I think it's, taking Tony Blair, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. That's been my number one kind of moment here is how we do it, because we have complicated events that we put on. Putting on a triathlon in central Singapore or in central London is not easy, and it's easy to get carried away with the complexities of the logistics and lose focus on the customer and the fact that they want it to be a simple process.
It's a great point that I used to have a business advisor in Australia, and he kept telling me, your business is fundamentally simple, your business is fundamentally simple, and I so often got caught up in this, how can you tell me it's simple when I've got thousands of volunteers, tens of thousands of participants, and I guess sometimes we lose the simpleness of the business that we're in, gets kind of overshadowed by the complexity of the events we're putting in, as you've just articulated, so great point. How about you, Michelle?
Sure, and certainly heard that a lot, right? And I think what we see across all industries, and clearly what we've heard over the last day and a half, is that sport is no exception, but technology is disrupting every industry across the board. And I think, in terms of simplicity, technology can help bring simplicity to things. It can help automate, it can help consolidate, and it can help, as we were talking a lot about, customize to really target, right? So I think we're seeing that as a big theme as well, and leveraging that. But at the end of the day, there's just a ton of passion behind these participatory sports. I think that's what makes it so unique, and so the stories and the inspiration, right? I think always has to come through, and I think that's what makes participation sports so exciting.
Thanks for sharing that. And interestingly, a number of people came up to me yesterday and said, your passion just showed through so much as you were doing that presentation. And I think we then had Paul today talking about purpose, and passion and purpose combined makes an incredibly powerful mix. And I think it's no surprise that there is so much success in this industry, which is fundamentally challenging, as many industries are, or probably most industries in this day and age. But to have that passion and marriage with purpose makes it so much easier to achieve and deliver and impact people's lives. Thank you. Ravi.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess 2 words that sum up the impact the conference had on me is innovation and impact. We had this discussion in Bali, what is mass participation going forward? It started off as fairly homogenous. It was running, basically, that's what it was. Now it's evolved into a variety of other physical races. We're looking at virtual races. People like Sam are looking at the impact of food events and mass participation. And maybe there's a way to impact nutrition around the world. I mean, I think the ability of the people in this room and the people that are in the business to impact the world, I think, is quite significant. And I think we've only scratched the surface. I talked about the relevant audience versus the actual population of the world, and really we're nowhere, you know. And I think how much can we do, you know, through what we do, I think is exciting for me. You look from the park run to Paul's conversation, you know, all the innovations that have, you know, happened in our space, I think really excite me, and how we can take what we all do and have greater impact on the world, and that's going to be through continuous innovation. So I think I've learned a lot from the presenters here on how we can take what was a fairly homogenous space and really branch it out.
Thank you. Rich, interesting, obviously, and an international perspective, a very mature market, seeing, and clearly there's lots of people from your market that are here, but how do you see what's happened in the US market? What have you learnt here that might you take back there as some of your key takeaways, and what you think might be the key takeaways for this market?
Sure. I think probably one of the biggest things to remember, whether your market is emerging, whether it's evolving, whether it's growing, is that sport is a great equalizer on all fronts, regardless of whether you're on the land or in the water or on two wheels. At the end of the day, all of our sports, all of our markets have the opportunity to bring people together to celebrate an accomplishment, whether that is a record or a record for them. And again, whether it's a mature market or not, whether it's 400 people or 40,000 people, we have the opportunity to bring those people together. Coming out of these couple days here, it reminds me from, I believe it was Lizzie from Octagon, who really hit home on the idea of storytelling. And again, whether you have 400 people or 4,000 people, those are the number of stories that you have at your start line. Those are the people you have to capture during their entire journey. And whether it's a soft-spoken story or whether it is an athletic performance story, I think those are really important for everyone to go home and remember. And I guess the other takeaway I would have from these last couple days really have been about the importance of technology and data. The ability to understand your own databases and how you might be able to use those to really increase and make your events more successful.
Thank you. And I see Lizzie's just come back into the room. I think that was very inspiring. And the one that picked me up was the piece about the quietest story. That amazing Liverpool piece was just incredible. So how often I think we get kind of sidetracked by the story of the elite athlete, the winner, and we miss out on those really human stories. And you know, talking to Chris McCormack just a little while ago, that, you know, they've got these amazing elite athletes. He feels that the Brownlee brothers are the best athletes in the world, but the stuff that's getting traction is the stories about them cooking, recovering from injuries. And we heard, talking to Tim, about the same thing behind the scenes with the Abbott World Marathon Majors. And I think the other point there to reinforce, and I think it was the content panel, I posed the question to Elliot about, I think in this industry on small budgets, we often get caught up on, I don't have the budget to be able to create the content, and he seemed to reaffirm that it actually doesn't have to be professionally produced. It can be done on an iPhone. There's so many different ways of us distributing it, and it's just dedicating that planning time and some human resources fundamentally to be able to share those amazing stories. We saw in the case study yesterday, and so many people spoke about it, the teachers, that didn't need high-end, massive multi-camera production to show the reaction on the faces of those teachers as they got their bib numbers. I think we have so many opportunities to tell those human stories. It's obviously a complex industry. It's challenging in terms of approvals and funding, and we had the panel on funding, and I'm just interested to get a government perspective. You know, obviously wonderful support here in Singapore from Sport Singapore and Singapore Tourism Board. My sense is that the business model in many markets is quite tenuous. We had risk management workshop from the guys from Chicago and New York, and we're talking about increasing costs of compliance and safety and security, and my sense is that one of the solutions to the future of the industry is greater government engagement and greater government support. And one of the things that I see quite often across the region, and in fact I've worked across 3 continents now, is you get sport at the table, you get tourism at the table, but not so often do you get health at the table. And I'm really just interested to hear the thoughts of how we pivot this as an industry. And my sense is that Singapore gets it, and more they're engaging health, but I think it's few and far between. And I'm just interested to hear in some of your markets how, Michelle, maybe from a sponsor stable perspective, you've been involved now for many years from a New York Roadrunners perspective and obviously as a TCS perspective. Are sport-related, health-related agencies and ministries and businesses getting involved and embracing it in the case of the US and your market?
It's a good question, and I wish I had an easy, quick answer to it. And I'm not clear, right? I think we did see in the healthcare sort of category, right, that come into sponsorship to some degree, and then it kind of is in and out, right? Not consistent. Certainly the corporate wellness is a huge opportunity. I think it was the 2 panels back, right, that I think Sam actually mentioned it, and you might have as well, right, that is such a huge area of opportunity. I think it continues to be. There's certainly, from a TCS perspective, they see that, right, as a tremendous opportunity. And I think, I want to hope that, again, as in North America, right, so jobs are changing dramatically right now, right? So as technology is coming into every industry, the type of work that people do is very different. So instead of physically going out to the fields or walking to the electrical box or whatever, you're now checking a camera, right? Or you're analyzing data behind a computer, or you're flying the drone instead of physically going, right? And so jobs are changing. They're a lot more sedentary than they've ever been. And I think moving forward, companies are going to really need to take note of that. I see it in my own home, right? The kids' bus stop, my husband's checking the Nest camera instead of physically going up and walking 10 feet to the front door, right? Or you're, oh my gosh, you see it everywhere. Or the Alexa, instead of, oh my goodness, my brother-in-law literally will fly the drone around the neighborhood to look for the kids, right? Like it's ridiculous, but that's very real, right? And if that's happening in our homes, like industries, it's completely changing people's lifestyles. And I think we're gonna have to really, corporate wellness is gonna have to be huge.
Robbie, maybe from an emerging economy perspective, my sense is that in India, they tend to kind of pay a little bit of, and I've heard people say this, the government stands up and makes broad sweeping statements about we're engaged in health, but is that trickling through to funding at grassroots and mass participation, or are the industries still driving some of that change themselves?
I don't think there's a homogenous definition of emerging market. And if you say India, there are 2 Indias, right? There are 700 million people that live in 660,000 villages, and they're worried about water and the next meal. So they're not our relevant universe. I keep going back to that. Then you talk about the 300 million that live in the cities, but they're divided into about 1,000 levels, right? So middle class starts at $5,000 a year, right? So you talk about government. The government there needs to do what it needs to do to get elected, and that's the masses in the villages, right? So they really don't contribute in the same way to healthcare as America has a homogenous middle class. So it's a different discussion. Therefore, you talk about corporate wellness. So let's talk about urban India, because that's the discussion here, right? And then we're talking about effectively white-collar urban India, really. So we're down to about 20 million people maybe, or maybe 50. Yeah, I think corporate wellness is the key, because governments are just, there's not enough ROI for them to focus on that, and that's why the Indian government isn't focusing enough on healthcare. So whilst lifestyle disease goes up, which is really, again, at the urban Indian level, that's where the corporates really need to come in. And I think that's where they can get great ROI, because people spend so much time working. I mean, it's funny, the French are sort of fighting for a 25-hour week, and Indians working like 80 hours a week, because they're trying to catch up. So because they're working so hard, and on that point, governments in the West are saying you can't call your employees after 5 o'clock. In India, if you don't answer your email on Saturday afternoon, your boss will call you and say, why haven't you answered your email? So I think if companies will then take a more custodial position on the health of their employees, they'll get more gratitude from their employees. They'll also then be able to impact what are rising insurance costs, and et cetera. So the motivation for companies is economic. Government, I think, certainly from where we are, the government in their own mind have bigger priorities. And I can't see them helping. They're more of a hindrance, frankly, than a help.
Interesting, thank you. James, how about from a UK perspective? Obviously, London Olympics legacy, has that been, the hype been followed up by action? Where do you see it going in terms of that government support of that?
In short answer to your Olympics question, I think it's been a massive missed opportunity. I don't think the legacy has got anywhere near where it should have done. What I would say to your original question about government and what they're doing, I think there are government agencies that are trying to make a difference. Sport England were lauded with their This Girl Can campaign, which was a great PR campaign to, I guess, break down the barriers of women participating in sport. But I think the trick that they missed is that they didn't provide the vehicle for them then to go on and do it. It was just more of here's a great PR campaign, I'm going to motivate you, but I'm then going to leave you to work out yourself, where do you go, where's next. UK Active, they're trying. UK Sport, from an elite perspective, they're pumping in millions of pounds to try and inspire the next generation through elite participation. And there's, pros and cons to that, and there's different viewpoints as to whether elite sport really truly inspires the mass athlete. But I think ultimately one of the challenges in the UK, and I think it's across the world, is as organisations we're competing with each other, and we're not working together to solve the biggest problem. We talked about childhood obesity in the trends panel, and schools are cutting down physical activity. There's like 45 minutes of PE per week for my kids. It's pathetic. You do 10 hours of math. You do 45 minutes of exercise. It's pathetic. And we've got to change the message, and we've got to almost come together as a group to try and drive that message, because governments and government agencies, London Sport will invest in the big events that will attract tourism, but they're not using that as a platform to then drive change of behaviour. And I think, nod to Paul. Parkrun, as an organisation, have done more than any government organisation to drive participation in sport. He mentioned the GP referral system. It shouldn't need Paul to come up with that. That should be front and centre from the government's perspective. But for some reason, it's not a priority, and sport has been cut. When I was a kid, I was playing football 6 days a week, and nowadays, I can't get my kids out. And I'm not going to get onto esports, but then that's a separate topic.
Thank you. And interesting, from one Paul to another, Paul Dunn's amazing presentation this morning was all about the responsibility of changing the world is not governments, it's the responsibility of businesses, or maybe not the responsibility. We might be sitting here saying it is the responsibility of the government, but the reality is that each and every one of us in our small and medium, and obviously some of us from the corporate world here can impact the world far more than governments can in terms of creating that movement for impacting people's lives with movement.
I think on that, though, the government has to help remove the obstacles in terms of helping it drive it forward, whether that's financial, whether that's access to facilities, whether it's whatever it is, they have to play a part. I don't think they are fundamentally responsible to come up with a strategy. There's lots of very good entrepreneurs out there that can help them drive the agenda, but they have to be involved.
I think that's a really valid point, and it came up in the government panel. Michelle, grab the mic there. It came up in the government panel as well this morning, in that it's, some people, and we see it very much in this country particularly. There's a perception that Singapore's this wealthy country and the government hands out money, and I've seen so many foreign entities come here and say, you're going to get a massive grant and it's going to deliver it. It's all about that partnership and working together, and sometimes it's simply removing those barriers of, we'll help you close the roads, we'll provide medical support for you without charging you, and so on, to be part of a partnership that drives it forward. Michelle, you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, again, so many organizations out there, right, doing amazing work, and just in terms of the youth, right, and really inspiring them to get moving, and the lack of physical education happening, the same things happening in the U.S., right? Just pointing out something amazing that New York Roadrunners did, and on top of the youth programs that they do year-round as part of their give back to the community, they really went and lobbied the education system within America, and lobbied to have running as part of the curriculum in physical education, right? And like a fundamental change to the curriculum in school. And teaching this lifelong skill, right? And again, mass participation could be all kinds of sports, but I think running is sort of that low barrier sport, right, walking, right. And it's been tremendous, right? So what they've been able to do in terms of impacting how kids are being taught, right? What they're being taught, and there's so many programs out there. We talk about Park Run. There's a program called Morning Mile. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's basically school-based, run freely, and it encourages kids before school starts to do a mile, walk, run around the track, and then school begins. Right, and that was just started by a teacher, and it's a grassroots movement.
Thank you. Rich, your perspective on that? I mean, interesting times. You felt that the industry in America, the running industry, was struggling, numbers were down. Was there ever any sense of, well, do we turn to government in any way to support this? Is it helping make it easier to close roads? Is it supporting funding? How does government play into it from an organised? We've heard from a more of a corporate perspective from Michelle, but from the industry perspective, is there more that can be done in terms of government help facilitate more people being active in our industry?
Nothing like being an American asked about our government on the last day while in Asia. I don't know, are there any immigration people here? I just want to, no, in all seriousness, I think the question really is, it depends in what market in the United States. I think that there are, in some instances, we've seen a growth of events put too much of a stress on closing roads and putting too much of a stress on first responders and safety and security and whatnot. I think one way to help understand the maturation of road running in the United States is what has been said before. People are continuing to run, but they're also continuing to do other things. They're still participating in yoga and cycling and other types of activities. There are twice as many people, or almost 3 times as many people, who consider themselves a runner or a jogger in the United States, but never cross a finish line. And so there's a real opportunity there. And how do you get someone who laces up to fill in the blank, to lose weight, to gain mental acuity, to just spend time with themselves? How do you get them to put on a bib? So there's opportunity there. As it relates to youth, I think, again, I won't rip off my shirt and start dancing here, but I think about the video that Paul had shared. There's governmental opportunity to lead from the top down, but I think that there's also opportunity to lead from the bottom up. And if that means, to Michelle's point, of walking a mile every day before school, or not relying on a doorbell to make sure your kids hit the bus stop. Getting moving, I think, is probably the right thing to do.
Thank you. We've only got 5 minutes, and I'd like to wrap by maybe saying this time next year we'll be back here in Singapore. The date for next year's event to put in your diary is the 2nd and 3rd of December, immediately after the Standard Chartered Marathon. Again, hopefully we'll see many of you back here. What kind of topics are we going to be sitting here discussing in a year's time if you had your crystal ball out? Starting with you, maybe, Rich.
Well, I think here in this region, to what Kate had said about the power of women, I could not echo that more strongly. I think there'll be more and more diversity and more gender balancing over the next several years. I think in some of the other markets, I think you'll see trends that have happened in the West happen much more quickly here in the East. And I think that technology and definitely sponsorships will continue to be key topics.
Robbie.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the topic specifically, but I'd like to say a couple of things. One is I think it's been incredible this week, and I think the diversity of the people here, compared to the first one, is fantastic, and hopefully that happens more, because you talk about global impact and all the rest, and the more people we can get from around the world, the more we can sort of cross-pollinate and perhaps have the sort of impact that we're talking to have. So I think you've done a great job. From my point of view, like I said, I think it's trying to leverage working with people in this room and the people who come in, our place in sort of the world to have more impact. Because I think this industry perhaps can have more impact than any other in the sports industry that I've worked at. I've worked across cricket and tennis and fashion and all that sort of stuff, but we have a real opportunity to have an impact and impact lives. And I'd like to see us, we've touched upon it a lot, but I'd like to see us talk about more than just the events, maybe the impact on health, that we can have. We talk about governments a lot, but I think what we can do outside governments is, for me, the most exciting thing, and perhaps where we can have the most impact. Are we all representing a bunch of nations, or is there an impact we can have on civilization? I think they're the sort of things that I think we should maybe try and look at last year. You and I talked about several things last time, and hopefully we can extrapolate on that. But I think if you can build on this and we can get more people from different areas of mass participation and from different countries, I think it's going to be a really, really exciting time next year.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And certainly that's the intention, is to continue to broaden the reach across the industry. I had a conversation with Tekin before he had to head off, and he's obviously very supportive, which is one of the reasons why we'll be back here next year. And he asked me to as part of the follow-up here, we obviously welcome everyone's feedback. There's surveys on the table, but one of the things he asked me to get from people in a couple of weeks' time is, what did you action as a result of being here at MPA? So it's great to sit here and have a great discussion and lots of talk, but it's only of any value if each of us go away from here and action, even if that's just one thing. So I'd love to encourage you, whilst this panel's finishing and whilst you're being inspired by Azran, but not too far from now, to make a commitment to action one thing as a result of something you learned here, and we'll be reaching out to you in the next couple of weeks, and we'd love to get your feedback as to what here inspired you to do. What did you act on?
I'm going to try and sell my business to Motive.
Sam's already gone already. You're too slow. Michelle, what do you think we might be talking about this time next year?
Sure, I think technology will always continue to be a big topic, right? And how that changes and the influence of that. It really resonated, the storytelling, right? That really goes across everything, right? And it's how we communicate out and get people interested. So I think that'll continue to be really relevant as well.
Thank you. James, last word.
For me, I think we talked about government and the need for government to support. I think we've talked about companies and corporate wellness. I think brands need to get on board more. We've got the endemic brands that support the event and the obvious ones. Yeah, Nike do it because they sell shoes and whatever. And, it's a pleasure sitting next to Michelle in terms of the TCF sponsorship, because working in that industry where we're trying to bring brands and educate brands and prove value to the brands of this space, I think they have a responsibility to also support this where we are at the moment. You know, again, back to sort of health and well-being. You look at what happened with Heads Together at London Marathon. That really massively increased the awareness of mental health. Now that is, you know, across everybody's radar. And yeah, I just think brands, more non-endemic brands, need to step up to the plate and put the money on the table.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think, you know, in summary, we, in many ways, are in an incredibly privileged space in this industry. We have the platform and the ability to impact millions and millions of people's lives. And I go back to one of the very first conversations I had this last 2 days was Paul was one of the first people that arrived at the speaker drinks, and very quickly we both met a common point where the best motivation, the best reward, if you want to call it that each of us get is that buzz of impacting people's lives, and I encourage us all to go on and do that, and look forward to hearing some great stories this time next year. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you to the panel, and thank you all for your support, speakers, sponsors, and delegates alike. We're going to hand over the floor now back to Sean and have Azran to close out. Thank you so much, everyone.